Well, hello and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 7 of The Horse and His Boy, Aravis in Tashbaan.
Taking place during the same period of time we just experienced in chapter 6.
No, this was during chapter 4.
Chapter 4?
Yeah, because that was when Shasta fell in with the Narnians.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
So
we
actually
really
we're going
covered
back
quite
a
a bit.
bit,
Yeah, we're covering quite a bit of distance here.
That's kind of fun to go back in time a little bit here. How do you feel about that?
I love it when they do this.
Yes. You like a good nonlinear storyline.
Yeah. I love when you see what happened to one character.
Sure.
And then you get to see what was happening at the same time. And that we can hold that in our brains and understand that the two things happen at the same time.
Yeah.
I love it in books. I love it in movies.
I, in general, just loved this whole chapter.
Yeah, you were really excited about this one.
I mean, okay, I sent you one text. That's not really excited. I said I liked the chapter.
Compared to, didn't like this chapter.
There was, I don't remember which one it was, which is, I guess it's okay. There was a chapter so far that I wasn't too keen on, but I don't remember what it was.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tarkeen. My bad. That's one of your jokes.
It's so funny when people do that.
But this one was really fun. Again, one of my favorite things about this book so far is just how is Lewis's world building is kind of unlike anything we've seen before. I like seeing more of this city of Tashbaan, despite many of the horrific things happening here, and despite what is a clear indictment of Clorman culture in the ways that they have. You know, slavery is so normalized. They have this, I've mentioned many times, this like, it's not a caste system, but it's a very strong hierarchy. And yet I am enjoying, maybe that's not the right word, enjoying, but I am interested in all that's happening here because, again, we've never been in a large city before in Narnia. This is the first time we've done this. And so I'm happy that we're actually going back. We're not just passing through for a chapter or two, but actually we're now going to go back and read this. So I enjoyed the chapter.
Yeah, it's a great example of Lewis using his ability to create a world that fits in with the other things that he's written in this world of Narnia. Not Narnia the place, but the whole kind of book universe, I guess. But also making it very different. Once again, we're now on the 5th book in the series, and it's different.
Yeah.
And still good.
You know, and as you say that, I'm thinking, when we first came across this city, I think it was like chapter 3, maybe I didn't make this comment, but I don't remember thinking like, oh, this just feels so not Chronicles of Narnia, because this is just not what we've experienced so far. And it still doesn't in a way. But I think that's some of the point. Like it stands in such stark contrast to the Narnia that we know and love from the previous books. And yet, as we're spending more time here, it does feel, again, it's very different, but it does, oh, okay, I guess this does exist here. This is why Narnia is so distinctly different. Have you read any further, by the way, since we last chatted?
No.
What have you read to yet? Have you read past this chapter?
It's a little blurry.
So no. We both have only read through chapter 7.
I think I've read at least one, maybe two more chapters.
You read chapter 2? No, I have
one
two.
more, or two more.
I'll stop.
Oh my gosh. Part of me wants to read ahead, but part of me wants to keep this lovely discourse back up.
I think it's fine. I mean, hey, we're having a good time here, so neither of us has read past this. You're lying a little bit. You might have gone further.
I definitely have read more because I started reading the next chapter and I thought, okay, good. Yeah, I'm still ahead of where Daniel is.
Okay.
I want to know when you predict what's going to happen. I want to know what level of wrong you are.
Well, I'll tell you what. It's I won't jump ahead too far, but under our episode notes here, where it says Daniel's dilemma, it is blank. Because I've got not because I didn't prepare. Oh, I did.
You've really got nothing.
Prepared.
You're completely not sure what's going to happen.
I know. I have just so many different things. I'm just going to let them kind of roll off I've never done this before, but I'm actually just going to kind of...
You've never just spoken without thinking before?
I'm going to just speak extemporaneously and see what happens here.
You should do that expeditiously. By the way, one of our listeners wrote in and said that we should probably eschew all the obfuscation that we've been using.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
We should use smaller words.
Did it ever email actually say that?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was like, that's great podcasting here for the... Hey, maybe they found the joke funny, even if I didn't.
I hope so.
All
That one's really more for my parents.
right. They still listen to the show?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, it's. I think we should go ahead and jump into this chapter. It is an odd chapter.
Yes, it is.
Therefore, I have the chapter summary. So I've got 149 words for you. Are you ready?
Let's go.
All right.
If you want to use an extra one, you can. It's 150 words or less.
All right. Well, I'm going to start so. So I put so at the beginning. So, immediately after Shasta falls in with the Narnians, Aravis encounters an old friend in Tashbaan. This friend, named Lazareline, is a fellow Tarkina. She has recently been married and instantly recognizes Aravis. Thinking quickly, Aravis hops into her litter and explains her situation to the old friend. Lazareline, who is mostly focused on status and comfort, brings Aravis back to her court. Surprisingly, however, Lazareline agrees to help Aravis out of the city. They decide that the easiest way for her to escape is through the Tisrock's palace. Aravis, disguised as a well-to-do servant, accompanies Lazareline to the palace, but their plan falls apart when they accidentally run into the Tisrock and his slaves. The two girls hide in an empty room. Unfortunately, the Tisrock enters the room with two men, one of whom is Aravis's fiancé. While the girls are still hiding, the men begin a secret meeting.
Well done.
See, that's a lie because it just took us...
Once it's edited, it's going to be really well done. I think my favorite was either attempt number 7 or number 14. I can't decide because they were both so close to perfection.
The names, I struggled with Tisrock and Lazareline. Is that right? Did I say it right that time?
I think so.
It's a little hard because in the audiobook, I can't remember the guy doing the narration, but he kind of like almost rolls some of that R in there a little bit.
It does seem like he speeds up for that part. I even checked to make sure I hadn't accidentally sped up the audiobook.
Yeah, it's a little tricky. It sounds like Lazareline, or it doesn't look like that, but that's how it's pronounced. And we'll actually talk about that more when we unpack some of the etymology behind her name later on.
I look forward to that.
But yeah, so that's the chapter, and it only took us 15 times to record the It took me 15 times to record the story. Well, I already shared my thoughts on the chapter before we did the summary. What were your thoughts here?
I really enjoyed this one too. It was very immersive, and I felt like we got to see more of the world, but from a slightly different point of view. And we also get to see how different Aravis is compared to her friend that she runs into.
Yeah.
They want very different things, and even the way Lewis presents that information is pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, I really liked Lazareline in this chapter. I thought she was probably my favorite Calorman so far outside of Aravis, because I think you could easily look at this. I'll try to save some of this for later as we get to the chapter. You could find her just to be this, she's just this apathetic rich girl who is, so obnoxious, doesn't care about others. But I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, because she does choose to help out Aravis, despite the fact she doesn't have to do that. And so it gives us this a little bit more morally complicated character. It's not like, this morally gray. No, a lot of the stuff she's doing is clearly not okay, whereas then helping her friend is a good thing. But so far, all the other Calormans we've met have been just straight up bad, right? One guy sold his son. One guy tried to buy the son. We've seen some other people hit Shasta. I mean, we've seen all kinds of just not great stuff so far throughout the first few chapters of the book. Lazareline was an interesting addition here. I liked her.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so let's go ahead and start here on the streets of the city, and we literally pick up kind of from that moment back in chapter 4. Do you have anything you want to read here at the beginning?
Yeah, I'd love to read something from the very beginning of the book. One sentence in. When Aravis saw Shasta hurried away by the Narnians and found herself alone with two horses who, very wisely, wouldn't say a word, she never lost her head, even for a moment. She grabbed Bree's halter and stood still, holding both the horses, and though her heart was beating as hard as a hammer, she did nothing to show it. As soon as the Narnian lords had passed, she tried to move on again. But before she could take a step, another crier, bother all these people, thought Aravis, was heard shouting, Way, 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 way for the Tarkina Lazareline, and immediately, following the crier, came 4 armed slaves, and then 4 bears carrying a litter, which was all aflutter with silken curtains and all a jingle with silver bells, and which scented the whole street with perfumes and flowers. After the litter, female slaves in beautiful clothes, and then a few grooms, runners, pages, and the like. And now Aravis made her first mistake.
Well done. I enjoyed the beginning of this because the tension just right there.
Yeah.
Boom, as we go back.
It's ratcheted up. There's also very descriptive language used.
Mm-hmm.
We can picture everything pretty clearly. And there's a lot of action happening.
Yeah, it ends here with Aravis making this mistake. The narrator says she makes her first mistake here. I mean, I don't know. I wonder if in some ways the narrator's a little too tough on her. It'd be hard not to look up, right?
Right.
I guess she should have just kept her head down. Okay, that's the name of an old friend of mine. Old friend. These girls are like, what, 13?
Yeah.
But it's someone that I used to know. I guess she should just kind of keep her head down, but she does look up, and she kind of wants to see what she looked like now that she was a great person and married, is what Lewis writes there. And then he even writes, it was fatal. Right? Because the two girls, they lock eyes, they see each other, and Aravis is like, uh-oh, she knows who I am. And in fact, Lazareline shouts out, Aravis, what on earth are you doing here? Your father. And then Aravis goes full-on Legolas here.
Right. I still don't fully understand the physics of how this works, but she gets up on top of that horse really quickly and gets her to stop talking, whispers in her ear, explains the situation, and is effective.
Yes.
She stops, and they get away with it.
She lets go of the horses, and then the narrator writes here, she swung herself up beside Lazareline and whispered furiously in her ear. I'm literally picturing Legolas as they're fighting the wargs, remember in Two Towers in the movie? And Gimli's riding up on that horse by himself, and Legolas pulls the one... You know the scene I'm talking about?
I'm waiting for you to continue.
He takes the one arm, and then he completely defies all physics.
And picks him up.
And flips around it to land on the horse. I know a lot of people don't like that kind of Legolas stuff because it really doesn't fit in with the books, but I still think
it was enjoyable to watch.
I still think it's cool that Legolas skateboards at the Battle of Helm's Deep.
Oh, yeah.
Again, I know that Tolkien would have absolutely hated that, but if we're honest, he would have already hated that elves showed up too. So at that point, just let it go.
Yeah. And there's a difference between books and movies.
Yeah,
so sometimes you got to make a choice.
I think I enjoy that part of Legolas's character in the movies. But yeah, that's what Aravis does here, little gymnast, which is cool. And she's just, shut up! Do you hear me? Shut up! She's very stressed out and anxious and nervous about this. Lazareline, interestingly, is using a loud voice as well too. She doesn't back down, as maybe if you or I would. If I was driving a car and I saw an old friend from high school, and I was like, "Hey, dude, what's going on? You know what? Maybe I'm at a stop sign." And then he jumped on top of my car. I'd be a little freaked out. I don't think I would necessarily reach. And he said, "Stop talking, stop talking." I probably would just stop talking. Mm-hmm. Instead, Lazareline gets just as loud, and Lewis says she didn't in the least mind making people stare. In fact, she rather liked it. What do we know about this character already?
Yeah, what a great sentence, because it shows that she's already different than Aravis and shows some of her motivations. She likes the attention.
She loves the attention, right?
In this situation especially, that's kind of dangerous.
Yeah, it's not great when you're trying to hide and you're a rather famous person like Aravis is. So just to kind of reiterate, the Tarkinas are these kind of Calorman noble women. And what we learn is that Lazareline has been rather recently married off. We don't really know anything else about her husband. We don't know if he's also like some really old guy, or maybe not. We don't. It's unclear. But she has now kind of gained a significant status being the wife of Tarkhan, which I guess I'm trying to understand this culture a little bit. So Aravis is a Tarkina, but she is unmarried. That means her father is a Tarkhan, correct? Does that title just get handed down, you think?
That's my guess.
That's what I would assume too. So it's kind of like this aristocracy where like she can only marry other people that have that same kind of level. Is kind of how I'm picking it up. And I don't. Maybe we did talk about this, but I guess her fiance, who's like 60, right? Is he widowed? Like, how come he hasn't married yet? I assume maybe he's widowed, and his former wife, who also was a Tarkina, has passed away, or something has happened to her, and so therefore he marries Aravis, or is supposed to marry Aravis. Is that how you're reading this?
Yeah, and I didn't know if they were limited to one wife or.
Oh, that's true.
And some of the stuff we've read kind of seems like they don't care about certain rules that we have as in our culture.
Yeah, I don't know if that. You're right. I don't think there's been any kind of comment that they have multiple wives, but there hasn't been anything that also says that they do.
Right.
So it's kind of up in the air. We can't really make a judgment one way or the other because there's so much about this culture that we still don't really know. Yeah. That's interesting. I really hadn't thought about that. That's a good idea. So maybe he is already married.
Yeah.
And oh wow, that's actually I hadn't thought about that. It almost makes it just the whole situation even sadder than it already was too.
Yeah.
So. So we see from Lazarine, she's very much well established in this high-ranking part of society, right? She likes it. She's eating it up. She loves the attention. She loves being wealthy. She loves the comfort that it brings, and just having this high social status, right? There's no less than 8 people to get her through the city. 4 people carrying her, and 4 slaves, it says. And let me go back here. The slaves are just kind of like swinging perfume, right?
That's nice.
No, wait. They're the litter. Sorry, actually. So the contraption that she is on is what's swinging with the perfumes and stuff. But there still are 4 armed slaves and then 4 bearers. So there are 8 men, what we assume are men here, to get her through the city. That's a pretty big deal. This is not just some random rich lady.
Right. I also love the idea of perfume being sent out in order. Is that for her? Is that so that she doesn't have to smell the city? Or is it a way of kind of announcing her presence? The thing that comes to mind is middle school gym class and everybody spraying Axe before and after gym. It's kind of ruining the scene for me.
When I was in middle school, man, we used to, I think by about like 8th grade, you figured out that like Axe is gross, right? Mm-hmm. No offense to anybody but maybe it isn't actually gross, but my only experience with Axe is 12-year-old me and every other boy in my middle school pretty much just living in a cloud of it. It wasn't like spraying it. It was like, I'm going to hold the button down for 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And then decide I don't need a shower today.
Right.
Right. And what we would do when I would go away on church camps is we would do pranks, but they were like not awful pranks, not like really hurting somebody kind of thing, but still like annoying middle school pranks. So one of the things that was really common is taking in different rooms on any kind of like retreat or something and axing them, which is where you would go and you would tape the button down on an Axe canister and then fill a room so that when the people came back, it just like you couldn't breathe.
The whole
in
thing
there.
would smell
so bad.
Yeah.
I never did that because I was a good kid.
You're very mature.
I actually didn't do it because I was never invited to. I was usually the one who was getting axed.
Yeah.
I wasn't cool enough. I was
It takes all kinds, man.
Everybody else was out like playing soccer or basketball, and I was like inside, with my Yu-Gi-Oh card. I didn't actually play Yu-Gi-Oh or anything, but it would like just imagine that was me. That one was me.
Well, you were also reading the great classics in 6th grade, so that kind of puts you in a different group.
I did go around. This is true. It makes me love my 6th graders so much more because I was so obnoxious. In 6th grade, we read The Merchant of Venice, and I understood maybe 5% of it. Mm-hmm. I didn't pay attention a ton in class, and a lot of it went over my head, and I told everybody my favorite book was Merchant of Venice.
Yeah.
Because I was like, makes me sound smart, doesn't it? And so 11 or 12-year-old me, whatever, was going around and be like, my favorite book's Merchant of Venice. Be like, name one character. It was a play by Shakespeare, so I assume he's the character. I'd be like, Shakespeare's my favorite character in it. You know what else I thought of? Here as we get this picture of the litter, I also thought of a thurible in like a Catholic mass. And actually, I know there's also other churches too. I know there's Anglican churches. There pretty much a lot of even Lutheran high church, services often have that to kind of bring this incense into the sanctuary as part of the liturgy. And I wondered if this was kind of if Lewis, who would have been familiar with this himself, was kind of making any connections between this kind of misuse of beautiful incense. And again, that's not to say that the only time you can ever have beautiful smelling things is in a church service. Not at all. However, these kind of this imagery of the perfumes being kind of swung back and forth in this procession, it's hard for me not to think of that image of maybe like the processional at the beginning of a mass. And so I was wondering if maybe what we can take from this is it's kind of this inappropriate. It's almost not inappropriate. I mean, it is, but that's not. The Clormans wouldn't know this, but it's almost kind of showing this divine status that they give to power and wealth and hierarchy. Mm-hmm. Like in the Christian tradition, where we might use that as a way to evoke an atmosphere that leads us into worship of something greater than ourselves. Instead, here, the Clormans are using it to kind of, one, was doing two things, right? One, it's literally getting the smell out of the crowded streets because now a rich person's coming through and they don't want to be, have to deal with the poor people, right? But then there's also this other kind of level that works on us as readers who might look at this as Blue Clormans worshiping themselves. They're taking something that's traditionally been used in the Christian liturgy, right? Or at least Lewis would know that many of us are aware of that, and showing them worship themselves, right? And so that's not necessarily what it could be, but I'm just trying to think, Lewis is very much aware of who his audience is. And I think for many of his readers, when he's writing in the early 1950s, they're going to picture, swinging incense back and forth perfumes. They're going to maybe go to the church more than they think of anything else.
Right.
So I'm trying to think, what could that be, and why would that be important?
Yeah, it definitely seems like it's a way to signal that this is royalty, and they're treating them like royalty.
And so obviously the Clormans are not secular at all. They're polytheists. They have, Tash is their main deity. But, and this is what I'm interested to find out as a new reader to this book, is that religion to them, is it more of this kind of cultural religion where most people are only kind of interested in what good it brings to them, especially those in the wealthy class who might be able to use it and be like, oh, well, we came from Tash originally, we're descendants of him, and that's why we deserve this power, that's why we can oppress other people, kind of thing? Or is it a legitimate belief? I think it's unclear right now, but all of these things are starting to make me question what is kind of the religious nature of Clormand. It is really interesting that in a place like Narnia, where there is no organized religion, we have, and yet that is the good place, right? We have Clormand, which is this land of oppression and injustice, is this place where there is this really strong organized religion. I'm really interested to find out what Lewis might be doing with that there. Obviously, Lewis is not anti-organized religion. He's a member of the Anglican Church himself. And while he might have critiques of religion, he's not anti-religious. But I wonder if his own early experience with his atheism, especially in the 1920s and the teens, being anti-religious, if that's kind of maybe what's going here. Again, all this is just kind of a theory. It's something I'm going to keep looking into. I don't really know. But it's all that stuff is just making the people of Clormand so interesting to me.
Yeah, I think he's adding more and more nuance to these characters too. Just the fact that we're seeing Lazareline and hearing how she treats her friend, but also how she really likes the attention. They're very different. They're going through a very similar situation, and their approach to it is just completely the opposite of each other.
Well, let's keep traveling throughout this chapter. Aravis, interestingly enough, tells her the truth. She tells her about the talking horses. She tells her that she's running away because she doesn't want to get married. And Lazareline, to her credit, doesn't just throw her out. Like, hey, this could really reflect poorly on me. Get out of here, or I'm going to turn you in myself. She's like, you want to sneak back to my house, right? I mean, she's like,
and
my husband's
that's because
not there.
It sounds fun.
Yeah, that is true. It isn't inherently because she's like, being altruistic here. It's more of like, ooh, I like, this is a little,
And I would imagine she's bored.
Yeah.
I bet this kind of lifestyle looks really good until you're in it, and then it must be pretty boring.
So far, although she has not been antagonistic towards Aravis, would you say that it's clear that all of her motivation is still self-serving?
At least 80%, maybe 90%
Okay.
self-serving.
I
think there's probably part of her that does want to help her out, but she keeps coming back to herself.
Yeah, I think so too, and we'll unpack that as we get further to the end of the chapter, because that's where I think there's some interesting things that happen here with this character, and I'm interested to know if this is kind of like her main chapter, and like we might see her at the beginning of next, and then we're done, or if she's a character through the rest of the book. I don't know. Yeah. I wouldn't be sad if she was around for the rest of the book, because I like her a lot so far. Well, eventually Aravis and Lazareline do travel back to her court. Lewis even makes a quick note to us that this is about the same time that Shasta is arriving in the court of the Narnians, right?
Right. And that's one of those devices that helps us connect each time point. So we're at the beginning again, and then we're going to hear throughout the story, oh, this is what this lines up with.
And Phil, I think one of your favorite lines in the whole chapter showed up here as they sit down, they set the litter down, and Lazareline gives a command to the servants.
She does. She makes sure that no one's going to speak about this. She says, and anyone I catch talking about this young lady will first be beaten to death and then burned alive, and after that be kept on bread and water for 6 weeks. There. Which is hilarious to me.
Let's talk about this, because there's no adverb used to describe how Lazareline says this. Mm-hmm. It just says, said Lazareline. And then Lewis moves on. The very next sentence after that, after she says there, is, although Lazareline had said she was dying to hear Aravis' story, she showed no sign of really wanting to hear it at all. She was, in fact, much better at talking than at listening, which already tells us quite a bit about her as a character. Mm-hmm. But let's go back to this threat. Is she being facetious here, or is this a legitimate threat?
I think it's probably facetious. I think that she would be really upset, but if someone does speak, they're going to have other problems at that moment. But maybe she does have this power. I think that it has to be at least a little bit facetious, because she's talking about the punishment continuing after they've been burned.
Yeah, I mean, first they're beaten to death, and then stuff like...
And burned alive.
Yeah, it's...
And then they're going to be put on bread and water.
I get the sense that she is exaggerating. Well, obviously she has to be exaggerating here, in kind of a jokey way, to get across the important point. Hey, don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
That she is serious. She's not like, hey, go around. No, don't you go around talking. And if you are, this was going to happen. It's like, look, it's not going to be good for you. Maybe she has a good relationship with the people in her court, and so she just needs to remind them, and they'll follow her. I don't know. You know what I mean? But I don't think this is just straight supposed to be this brutal kind of thing from her. Oh, she just I mean, again, this is not saying that what she's doing is good. She's literally using slave labor here. She has these servants. She very much is part of an unjust system here. Mm-hmm. But I don't think this line is supposed to be like, look at how awful she is.
Right. It sounds like this is just how you communicate sometimes, if you want to get a point across.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't know anything myself about exaggerating, because I don't do that, especially on this show.
Right.
But I just thought it was a really interesting line. To me, it was more comedic than anything else.
Agreed.
But then, then they have this little... they have story time together.
And bath time, which takes quite a while.
Yeah, they're very famous for the baths, which is an interesting thing, because we've talked a little bit about the connections between the Ottoman Empire and Muslim culture in the Middle East and the Calormans. And we've made critiques of it, but also just talked about some of the why behind it. Interestingly enough, during the Crusades is actually when the Europeans during the Crusades did not have as strong of a culture around hygiene as the medieval Muslims did. And so it's actually after the Crusades take place that many Europeans start learning kind of the benefits of bathing more regularly, and they take that back to them after the Crusades. So I do think that's something that Lewis is pulling from here. As I think this is the second time we've heard about Calormen baths and kind of how like long and luxurious that they are. Not that the Narnians don't. We know back in the Silver Chair that happens as well too, because that imagery of the water in the bath comes up, I think, at least twice with Jill and Eustace. So, but I just thought it was an interesting thing.
Yeah. It also reminds me, maybe you were the one telling me about this, but one people group is going to another people group, and they're walking around with perfume to like kind of get the smell out, and they think that it's a great honor, but they're actually just trying to cover up the smell of the Europeans who had arrived on their land.
Oh, I didn't know about this. Yeah.
That's some funny imagery to me too.
So they have this story time, and I do think this is interesting because we know that the Calormens are good storytellers. Lewis has made that clear as the narrator, objectively, that they're good at storytelling. And yet, as Aravis tells the story, and we know that she's good herself, Lazareline, not even close to being interested in it. Right? Very much, very selfish, very interested only really in herself right now.
But then, after a period of time, she's finally able to set her down, convince her, and they start to make plans. And even though they finally...
Can I pause you for a second?
Sure.
Do you want to talk about the questioning that goes back and forth between the two?
Sure. Lazareline is trying to make sure that Aravis doesn't really want this life because she doesn't understand how he cannot want this. 3 palaces, luxurious baths every day. There are all these, quote, benefits that there could be. And Aravis just is a different personality. She wants adventure. She wants to ride on horseback and go places. And she doesn't want that life. And finally, then Lazareline is convinced to listen and help start making some plans.
And I think that's really well said and summarized. I think this is the most interesting part of the chapter for me, because everything leading up to this point in the chapter would have me as a reader assume Lazareline is not going to necessarily get in the way, but it's going to be like, all right, look, you really don't want this kind of life, then suit yourself. Can you make sure you're gone in the morning? She's not going to throw her out. Yeah. She's not going to go, I'm going to go tell your dad. No. But what she does say is like, all right, cool. Let me help you. So I think this is a good place for us to have a little sidebar about Lazareline. And I'd like to start with discussing the etymology of her name, because I came across something interesting in Paul F. Ford's Companion to Narnia. Can I read this for you here?
Let's hear it.
So Ford writes this. He says, her name, in fact, is derived from Lazar, an obscure Scottish form of leisure. The suffix "-ine" is the Gaelic feminine diminutive. So interesting here. He's literally pulling from the word leisure. If you were to ask me one word to describe her at first, I might start with like lazy. But Lewis instead goes for the word leisure here, and I think that might be a better way of understanding this character. Can she be lazy? Sure. Is she self-serving? Absolutely. It's not for anything other than leisure, right? She's almost like a hedonist in that way, that it's just whatever feels great, whatever just makes me comfortable, and I just want to be happy. And it's an interesting thing, because I think, especially in modern and postmodern culture that Lewis might be thinking about, a lot of times that's not viewed inherently as a bad thing, right? Kind of postponing adolescence, kind of just focusing on, hey, like only what makes you feel good. Don't worry about anybody else, and those kind of things. And Lewis would obviously push back against those things. And again, this isn't to make Lazareline out to be a good guy in this chapter. I think it'd be really hard to argue that she is. But instead, it shows us that her love of leisure has taken her to be to oppress people, right? It's taken her to really focus on only what makes her happy at the expense of others. It's taken her to really not have much empathy, even for people who are equal with her, right? Aravis is an equal on a societal level. And yet, does she follow all the social cues? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Does she actually care about them? Not at all. And so it shows us kind of the danger of just pursuing leisure for the sake of leisure, right?
And it shows the problems with someone having that power and that power not being challenged or threatened. Well, I guess threatened would be different, but when someone's in a
It
position...
sounds like you're calling for a revolution in Calorman, Phil.
Yeah, hey, I'm all for it. But I do think that in the real world, when you don't have that much, when you can't have that life of leisure, you learn how to work with people and how to respect people a little faster, hopefully, because you realize that there are consequences for the things that you do. But because she is in a position of power, she doesn't experience any of the consequences. And she has slaves, she has servants, she has people perfuming the air around her.
So she doesn't even have to like think about the fact that there's poor people out there. She doesn't have to think about the fact that people are living in places that don't smell good, right? All of that is just completely outside of the bubble that she exists inside of.
Right.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think that's what makes, again, I'm not saying, oh my gosh, I love this character because I want to be like her. I find her to be a character we've never seen before in Narnia, and that's what I find interesting about her. In the same way that, like, we still talk about the Lady of the Green Kirtle because I think she's extremely interesting, even though she's an evil witch. Like, that's, Well, so Phil, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but what lessons do you think we find in this character?
I think that when you don't experience the bad stuff, and that the bad stuff could be having to wait in line or having to navigate through a crowded city, you start to lose empathy. And I think that there's something really grounding about, in our world, having to wait in line to get onto an airplane. And being on an airplane is already, you're already pretty high up compared to other people who...
It's a luxury.
You're literally high up, but you're also, it also is a luxury to be able to travel that far for a relatively low cost compared to like caravanning across the United States. And I think that when you don't have those experiences, you don't understand how other people might be feeling when you do stuff. And that's tough.
Yeah.
And I think the only way to learn that sometimes is to go through it yourself. And I also think that it's worth understanding that you can't understand certain things. Like there are things that the two of us will never be able to fully understand what it feels like. But I think
to be an astronaut.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but we're getting there.
Yeah.
If Richard and Jeff get to go, I think podcasters are next. I'm just saying.
You think so? It's Jeff Bezos, Richard, what's his face?
Branson.
He's not going to sponsor the podcast anymore. I forgot his name. It's a real bummer. This episode of the Lamppost Listener brought to you by Virgin Mobile. Isn't that what he owns? Right?
That's right. Virgin Podcast.
Yeah. But we'll be third after him. It's not Bill Gates. It's not Zuckerberg. It's Daniel and Phil.
Send us up to space for 9 minutes at the cost of whatever.
Honest,
we have patrons.
It's that's what it's going towards. If we get to, you think 100, that should be enough. I would think to send us there. I don't know what it costs, but I assume
cost is no object.
Oh, okay, great. So, here's the thing. Let me just say this for a second. I guess it's been in the news. Richard Branson went to space. I think it's great that other people want to go. I have zero desire. Maybe it's because I'm a humanities guy, and they're not again. Humanities and science very much work together. But just I don't know. I just don't find it that appealing.
Yeah.
I'd rather just go do that mission to Mars thing at Disney World and be like, yeah, I did it. It's the same thing.
Win a simulation.
I'm glad people aren't like me because I like that people are continuing to push the limits and to really try to understand more of God's creation. So I'm not trying to be like, oh, these people shouldn't go to space. It's not cool. I just I feel like so many other people are so interested in that stuff. I'm like, I am in the minority. I'm not interested in that. Are you want to go to space?
I think it'd be really fun. I don't know if I right now it's easy because I don't have the opportunity to do that. But man, it sure does sound fun.
See, if someone came to me and was like, you get to choose either going into space
or all the ice cream you want.
Or just like spending a week in Oxford. I'd be like, I go to Oxford for a week.
Yeah. It's not Cambridge?
I would travel there as well too.
Seems like Cambridge is where the work's done.
I would go there as well. But like that, like I think more people would be like, oh, I can go to England whenever. I'd like to go up to space. And I'm just like, not for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So back to Narnia. So Aravis and Lazarine do decide that the best way for her to get out of the city is through the Tisrock's palace, right? He's got this kind of this route through the water that will lead her out of the city because Aravis can't really go out through the main gate. However, the horses can. So we get a quick little cameo of Bree here, not Hwyn, where Aravis just says, hey, you guys are going to go out with some of the servants, and I'll meet you on the other side. But then the two girls, Lazarine and Aravis, they wait a day because Lazarine has to go to a party, and then they make it to the Tisrock's palace. And Philip, what happens here? It does not go well.
They hear voices, someone's coming, and it's interesting. They see people walking backwards, and they know that indicates that there's royalty coming.
Was that not creepy?
Yeah, and then you find out that they both cannot speak and they cannot hear.
Yeah.
And that must mean this is a very secret meeting.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about this. So they're stumbling and they're trying to get to the right place, and they accidentally kind of come down a corridor where there's these two men walking backwards. And both of the girls know, because of their upbringing, that has to mean that royalty is nearby, right? And they're in the Tisrock's palace. Guess who it's probably going to be. And because you have to walk backwards, which these are the little kind of world building things that are really interesting,
right,
that Lewis is putting in here. It's like, oh, just a little bit more about kind of how their culture works. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of stuff I find very interesting. And in a panic, they go and try to find a room, and they do find a pitch black room that seems to just have a sofa in it. At least that's all they can find, and they hide behind it. And then there's some really interesting stuff about how the girls are kind of fighting to fit behind it, right?
Right. Yeah, one person hits another, the other steps on someone's foot, and then they have to stop because people are coming.
Exactly, right? Aravis has kind of her face shown. It's behind a veil because she's dressed up here as a servant. That's kind of the whole idea is, hey, if they get caught, Lazarine will say, oh, I'm delivering her to another princess here. It's kind of the old Han Solo and Luke in the Death Star with Chewbacca. We're taking him to prisoner block AA-23, right?
Right.
And didn't work for them either. Doesn't really work for for the two girls. For the two girls here as well. They hide behind this couch, and what I guess is it Lazarine who's pinching Aravis because she wants more space behind the couch?
Right.
That's
have a quick little bickering fight, and then
the door opens and three men walk in. Who are these three men?
These are some bad dudes.
That's that is the prose that Lewis wrote here.
He immediately switches into spaghetti western writing.
What spaghetti westerns do you know that use the phrase "bad dudes"?
Those are some bad dudes.
Is that your favorite Clint Eastwood line?
I think that the problem with some of my education about that is all this stuff is I'm watching a parody of a parody.
I was like, you know that Blazing Saddles is not considered a spaghetti western,
yeah,
right?
So that's the problem. Is like I'm watching a parody of Blazing Saddles, which is parodying.
Part 3 is not a spaghetti western.
Man, I think I really need to watch that.
Here's a funny joke about. Oh, wait, have you not seen it?
No.
Oh, it's great. Here's the weird thing about Back to the Future. I saw Part 3 first. So I assumed that they were all Western movies.
Yeah.
And if you've seen the first one, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know the characters. When Marty goes back to, I think it's 1885, he says his name's Clint Eastwood. And I first saw that movie, I was like 8 or 9. I didn't know who Clint Eastwood was, so I just thought it was a made-up name. And the first time I ever heard the actor, Clint Eastwood, I was like, that's crazy. He's got the same name as that character from the movie.
Yeah, everything is in the wrong order.
And then 10 years later, I figured out it was actually the joke, you know?
Right, yeah. Speaking of funny names, do you know Michael Caine's real name?
Mike Caine?
I want you to look it up on the air right now and record your reaction. Michael
Caine, real name. His real name...
We should only reveal what his real name is to our patrons.
It's not. It's not that it's a bad name.
It's that
It's really not. In fact,
it's a great name.
yeah, I like all three of these.
It was his
names.
father's name.
It's I have no issue. In fact, one of these names is one of my son's names. So like it's just that like that's not Michael Caine. That's
Right.
complete. He didn't choose a name remotely close to his real name.
Right, which is kind of understandable. Also, he had so much trouble at every airport he ever went to that he finally just officially changed it to Michael Caine because he couldn't stand people thinking his ID was fake every time they saw his ID.
I can't believe it. I do think I'm not going to say his name here on the show. It's not bad or anything, but I want our listeners to go Google it themselves and just come across it with the same reaction I had. I mean, I'll tell him it is Therm Scissor Punch. That's the character
No.
from Solo, as we mentioned earlier in the season. His real name is Salacious B. Crumb. All right. Back to Narnia. So. The three guys here. Did we name any of them?
No.
No, we didn't even get past bad dudes.
Bad
Okay.
dudes.
Who are they, Phil?
There's one person that is definitely the Tizrock. They can tell because he has so many nice jewels, the least of which is worth more than all the expensive stuff that all the Narnian lords
wear.
have. Yeah.
Interesting.
Which is quite a lot of value.
And then you have one unnamed man, right?
Who is the Grand Vizier?
No, that's
her
the
husband.
Third guy. That was her fiance.
Okay.
He's just been promoted to Grand Vizier.
That's her husband. Then there's an unnamed guy. Okay.
Then an unnamed guy.
But he's a tall young man with a feather and jeweled turban on his head and an ivory sheathed scimitar at his side.
So we've got these three guys. You've got her fiance. You've got the Tizrock and this unnamed man, and boom, the chapter ends.
That's right.
Right? They walk in, and that's it. There's nothing really else to say here because the chapter's over. Any other things you want to unpack before I get into my theory?
Sure. I think that the way this chapter ends is so ominous, but it's not using any of the cliche cliffhanger type things. They just walk into the room, the people are behind the couch, and we know we're going to get some details before anything happens, right? There has to be some kind of conversation. They didn't just walk into this room to discover them, I would think, but we'll see.
Okay. But you do know because you read the next chapter.
I do, yeah.
Well, then I think it's time for me to share a little bit of my dilemma. So for this chapter, here's my theory for what happens next. The next chapter is chapter 8. It's called In the House of the Tizrock, which doesn't really tell me anything because we're already there.
By the way, I kind of wish that these chapters didn't have titles.
It's Tizrock. I said Tizrock, but
Tizrock.
it's Tizrock,
Right.
right? Just 2 syllables. Okay.
2 syllables. I think that some of these chapter titles give away a little bit.
This one didn't, though.
Not this one. Later on, because every time I flip to the middle of the book to find where we are, I keep seeing something from a few chapters later. Maybe I should flip from the other way. That's a good point. Okay, continue. Daniel's dilemma.
All right, so here's what I think's happening here. I have a lot of things that could potentially be happening, but I'm going to go with a conservative guess here because I'd like to be right. Okay? I think this third unnamed man is Rabadash, right? That is the prince who Susan is supposed to be married to, right? Or potentially. And at this point, the Narnians should have left, right? It's been a day since Shasta fell in with the Narnians, right? Mm-hmm. So at this point, Shasta's on his way out of the city. It might already be at the tombs, which means the Narnians are probably back at their ship, preparing to hold the feast, or maybe they have already held it. Again, like I said, I didn't write anything down here. I'm just speaking extemporaneously. So, what I think is that these 3 guys are planning to attend the dinner for the Narnians, and they're going to attack them all while they're there.
Oh, okay.
They have decided, they kind of see through the fact that the Pevensies, or the Susan and Edmund and the Narnians are up to something. And they are planning to attack the Narnians. Now, here's the thing. I don't think it's going to matter because the Narnians aren't actually having them over for dinner. They're planning to secretly sail away. But I think that's maybe what they're going to be discussing. I could be wrong, and it could be something way more earth-shattering. But I think it's more just, I don't think it's actually, I think what's really happening here is something that we kind of already know about.
Okay.
So there you go.
All right.
I think I've been wrong on every single thing I've guessed so far.
But that's part of the fun.
So we're just continuing. That's the tradition of the show now, you know?
That's right.
It's like how if I pronounce things correctly, it would be the point.
What would we have?
Yeah, we'd have nothing.
Just like every other podcast.
Yeah, that's what makes us unique. All right, well, like I said, we have Chapter 8 is coming up next. But before we go, we've actually got two
Listener feedbacks.
emails here today, and I'm going to read the first one. It is an email from Tyler. And when Tyler sent us this email, I stared at the subject and then read the email and went back to the subject and was just so confused.
I did the same thing.
Because, we record these a little out of order. We're a little bit ahead of, we record these quite a bit of time before we release them.
We record them in order. We just record them very far ahead of time.
That's not true. This is Chapter 7. After this, we're going to record Chapter 2.
No.
Hasn't come out yet. No.
This is madness.
Tyler's email subject just says blue screen. And so I'm going to read you the email in a second. And I kept coming back. I'm like, blue screen? What does that have to do with any of this? I don't understand.
And then it dawned on you.
And then I remembered that when we had William on the podcast to talk about the silver chair, we talked about blue screens and green screens. And I made some snide comment of like, hey, like,
if you want your email read,
if you want your email read on the show, write blue screen in the subject.
We're men of our word.
Tyler is a rule follower. He's a loyal listener, and he has followed the directions. And so, Tyler, we're going to read your email now, although it does have a spoiler alert, which I'll clearly state when we get there. Tyler writes, well, hello, my fellow Narnians. I'd like to congratulate you on the 5th season of your show, and I just wanted to say I love listening to your show every other week. It really makes me enjoy the Narnia books. This season 5, I will be reading along with you with The Horse and His Boy. I tried doing this with The Silver Chair, but had something pop up and I forgot. I decided this season I would read along because I'm going to read the Narnia series again for my library contest, so I thought it would be perfect to start with y'all. Now, he then has a spoiler alert based on something we talked about rather recently in some of our other episodes, and it is a spoiler for a little-known movie called The Empire Strikes Back, 1980, released in May of 1980.
Indie film. George
Little
Lucas.
indie film.
It's more of a visual poem, really.
So if you or your family, anybody listening, has not seen The Empire Strikes Back, now's your time to tune out for a movie that came out 41 years ago.
That's right.
He does write that Darth Vader...
Darth Vader.
Oh, gosh. I just said about mispronouncing stuff. Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. That's it. That's it. They just threw that in there for us. And then he said, I hope I successfully made you laugh. Well, have a blessed day. I think he did. I think Tyler did.
He did.
As we get there, I have thought a little bit. Let me actually talk about Empire Strikes Back for a second. I've thought about how we're going to introduce this to my son and any future kids we have. Like, how do we go Star Wars? Do we go release order? Do we go 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, and then maybe 7, 8, 9, I guess?
So my recommendation is you need to start preparing for this way earlier. And I think you're already doing this, but no YouTube.
Yeah, we don't do screens.
No entertaining anything that has a screen until he's 6, and then introduce him to Star Wars. And then it will be as interesting as it was for me, who grew up part Amish and didn't have access to anything, and Star Wars was great because I had nothing else to compare it to.
Well,
in terms of like entertainment design for me.
Yeah, here's the thing about Star Wars and just in general, not just Star Wars, even like Lord of the Rings and stuff. I think I have to get past I want my son, or I want any of my kids to experience it just like I did. I think that's a recipe for disaster and me like pushing it upon them, right? Like there's a pretty good chance that my son does not like A New Hope as much as I do. It's my favorite Star Wars movie because it's the first one for me. I spent so much time rewatching. It's the one I watched the most on VHS. As the first one I saw in theaters because of the special editions in the 90s. And, like, that's okay if he's like, my favorite's Attack of the Clones. I'll disagree with him, and we'll have, like, fun conversations.
Yeah, and you'll tell him why he's wrong.
Here, I defend. Look, you know this. I kind of defend the prequels now. I didn't 10 years ago, but I'm much more.
I'm just glad we have it on tape.
Yeah. But I think for me, here's actually how I'm planning on introducing Star Wars to him. I mean, he's listened to the soundtracks. We do that a lot when we play with. He has the little people. Mm-hmm. I think that's what they're called by Fisher Price. And we have a couple Lord of the Rings characters in the Beatles, and he makes like John Lennon fight Gandalf, and it's really funny. Not fight. I mean, he just holds them up, and I'm like, they're fighting now.
Right.
Maybe I shouldn't do that actually. But we'll usually put on soundtracks on the record player in the back, and a lot of times we go to Star Wars because I have, that one of my prized possessions is I have from 77, 80, and 83. I have the original soundtracks that were produced that year, first printings. I really love those things. But I've thought about, okay, when do we show him the movies? Because Anna and I disagree about the right age to introduce him. Because I'm kind of like, I don't want to introduce him as soon as possible because I want anything to be spoiled. I don't think that's actually the best idea. So now we're thinking about doing the story of Star Wars. A lot of people don't know about this, but in 77, before you could go out and buy stuff on VHS, there was a record that came out in the summer of 77 that was called The Story of Star Wars, and it was just the movie with a narrator. It was like an audio book, but more like a radio drama. But it took lines from the actual movie with Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill, and then music conducted by John Williams, and put it all together to make this kind of like 50-minute version of the movie.
Wow.
And I think like maybe that's how we'll introduce it.
Whoa.
As this kind of, I know it's like,
it's unconventional.
It's unconventional, but I think you're right. Like I think I'm not going to sit him down and watch it at 2 years old.
Right.
But at the same time, I would like to, listen to the music together and him not be like, well, what's this from? I want to go watch it. I'm like, I don't think you're right. You're quite ready for that yet. So like, this would be a great way to introduce, as he's screaming downstairs right now. I hope that didn't make it into the microphone. I think that might be an interesting way to introduce it. I'm also no longer against the idea of going episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I know a lot of people disagree with that. And I still would prefer to do 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, but I've done it enough in my own classes to know that kids watching them, like when I show my class episode 4 and we watch the original Star Wars, so many of them are like, it's too old, I'm completely out. Yeah. And I hope that my son isn't raised like that, but I'm also not against being like, let's start with Jar Jar and you can laugh at it. And
then work our way up.
Yeah, how do you feel about this? Tyler had no idea this is what he was getting into when he wrote this one line in the email.
That's right. I feel like you should watch things in the order they came out.
I usually do agree as well.
And I can understand wanting to get them hooked with the action in episodes 1, 2, and 3. And then technically, even if it's a few hours later, they'll be older when they watch 4, 5, and 6. And there's also something to watching things completely out of order.
Yeah.
I was actually talking to Andrew from Outer Rim Reads.
Yeah.
And he has seen a couple of the new Daniel Craig James Bonds and then one of the old ones. But there's no pattern to it.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
There has to be there has to be like a couple people. I bet there's less than 24 people. Okay, I'm exaggerating here. But the vast majority of people have watched James Bond movies out of order. Did you start with Dr. No? You know what I mean? Like, no one does. Very few people start and go, okay, I got 24 movies now, and I'm going to start with Dr. No and then eventually get to, what was that one that came out a couple years ago? Spectre. Yeah. Nobody does that. You got to order. And I think, for Star Wars, I watched A New Hope, Return of the Jedi, and then Empire Strikes Back.
Right.
In the 90s. I'm like, I love Star Wars still. It didn't ruin it for me.
But we're in a different time where there were 3 Star Wars movies, and then they made 3 more, and that was kind of it. And they had the cartoon, but we didn't really have to watch that to understand all the stuff in the movies. They actually fit together pretty well, but it wasn't super necessary. And then you could play a video game or 2. But think about it now, and think about Marvel. We're in the 20s for everything.
Mm-hmm.
20 plus James Bond, 20 plus Marvel movies, and they're actually pretty good. It's different when you can skip the first 6 tries, but now
That's how the Star Trek movies are. With like, I think when we do watch Star Trek, I'll be like, look, we're going to skip all the odd number ones.
we
we're
don't
just
need
going to watch 2, 4, 6,
right,
and then a couple of next gens, and then I like the new ones enough, except for Into Darkness, you know that. But
I just don't understand.
This
let's
is great.
Sit down and watch that again, and let's see if my opinion gets worse and if yours gets better.
All right, we'll watch it again. I think it's a great cast. I love Giacchino's score. I absolutely think it's one of the best Star Trek scores, and there's a lot of great. Jerry Goldsmith did a great job, and the original series was wonderful too. But like Giacchino knocked it out of the park with the Star Trek themes. Really well done.
Yeah.
All right, but thanks, Tyler, for this email. We're glad that you're enjoying season 5. Thank you for giving us this little spoiler alert about, as I called him, Dark Vader. But we've got one more email though. We got actually one more special email today. Phil, you've got this one from former guest and patron and listener, friend
of the show,
That's
Sarah
right.
Kozar. Hey, Phil and Daniel. I will try to contain myself, but I'm sure I'll be tempted to write y'all a dissertation-length email after every episode this season. There's so much in this book that I love. I rode horses growing up. I never learned how to vault into a horse's back, but by age 12 I could mount from the ground if the horse was saddled. When I tried riding again a year and a half ago at 37, I was shocked at how much taller horses seemed to have become. Mount from the ground? That would take the flexibility of Simone Biles. Fortunately, my instructor brought me a mounting block, so I kind of slid onto the horse's back. I related very much to Shasta in that moment, trying to clamber up this huge animal, and I'm sure my horse agreed with Bree that I climbed up her as if I was climbing a haystack. Anyway, as a longtime rider who's been mostly away from riding for a while, but has retained my love and interest in horses, I very much enjoyed y'all's conversation about how high up one is on horseback. It really is an amazing feeling. I always marvel at how God seemed to make horses specifically for riding. But not only that, they can help us heal too. I started riding again in 2020 as therapy for my damaged abdominal muscles. Riding a gentle horse bareback helped stretch out tight tissues and slowly helped me develop back some core strength. Unfortunately, the pandemic brought a stop to that, but I hope to resume soon. But not only did God make horses suitable for us, he also made them fast and beautiful. What a creator! To give us these magnificent animals who are endlessly useful, but also, in their glory, point back to the beautiful genius of their maker. I know Lewis agreed with me about horses because he mentioned them a few times in his nonfiction writings, but especially because he wrote a whole book with horses as main characters, just like he loved ships and wrote Dawn Treader. He invites us to wonder at things that draw him to wonder, not by telling us they are wonderful, but by slowly unveiling their wondrousness through action and dialogue, as much as description. I think he does this with God too. I think I mentioned on the podcast last season that the horse and his boy was my favorite encounter with Aslan. I won't spoil anything, but it does feel like Lewis learned more and more about God as he wrote the Chronicles, and translated what he learned into the character of Aslan for his readers. What a gift he has given us, and what gifts God has given us, in both writers and animals who draw us closer to his glory. Can't wait for the rest of the season. Narnia in the North. Sarah.
It seems weird that Sarah thinks that her favorite encounter with Aslan is when he just rode up against them in chapter 2, right? I assume that's what she's talking about here.
Yeah, that's all you know
now. He's going
now.
to show up in the book, I guess. So when he ran up and barked at, oh my gosh. I just said barked. When he ran up and roared at the horses, I guess that's what she's speaking about. I'm just kidding. This is a great email, Sarah. We always love Sarah's thoughts, especially with regards to animals. I thought it's really interesting the way that Sarah mentioned that Lewis kind of slowly reveals these things. He invites us to wonder with him, right? He doesn't say, look at this great thing, you should like it too. He's like, I love this great thing, and by displaying my love for it, I think that's contagious. Right? Again, it's show, not tell. I mean, that's one of the most, basic ideas of a writer, right? And he takes it further with his themes and the way that he introduces goodness, truth, and beauty, in that I'm not just going to show you what's good and true and beautiful. I'm going to show you that I love what's good and true and beautiful. And I think that'll make you love it too, right?
Right.
I mean, how often do we know someone, like we watch a YouTuber, or we listen to a podcast, where maybe people feel that about us. Probably not as many, but maybe some, where they're like, someone else's enthusiasm makes me interested in something that I might not have been that interested in before.
Right. And I don't know about this podcast, but certainly with our friendship, we've experienced that, where you'll be into something or talk about something, And I've had it recommended multiple times before, but there's something that you say about it that gets me hooked because you're excited about it and you really enjoyed this specific part, or it connects to something that we already both like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now I feel like a jerk because you've been playing chess for years now, and I still haven't. So.
No worries. I have a lot of interest. I think you do too.
Yeah.
Let's just be grateful there is some overlap.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, thanks again for this email. It's always great to
hear
from Sarah and get these, especially on we haven't had horses in around for a while at this point. Really, since chapter 4, chapters 5, 6, and now 7, very little horse dialogue. So hopefully we'll see them more in the next chapter,
right,
or 2.
Need to balance it out with some episodes of Ed.
Yeah. You want to go find some on YouTube?
Sure.
Well, Phil and I need to go find episodes of a horse with peanut butter in his mouth. Isn't that what they used? I think that's what they used.
I'm sure.
So we're going to go ahead and let you all go, and I will read our end credits for today's episode. Like always, listeners, this episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can listen to an extra episode each month along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to Elias Dean, Hannah Anderson, John Marr, Emily Wakefield, and Ryan Smith for supporting us at our top tiers. If you have any listener feedback, we'd always love you to email us at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 406-646-6733. As always, we appreciate a review wherever you get your podcast because this helps other listeners find the show and join together on our read-through. Thank you for coming along on this journey, and we'll be back next time for Chapter 8.
See you soon.